And we should be live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm here with Pete Everitt. We'll talk about SEO today. Pete, thank you so much for joining us today.
Not a problem at all, Jan. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'll make sure and check in the groups that the live streams are running properly.
Cool. Okay. I'll hijack your live stream. That's fine. So yeah, my name's Pete. I am a digital agency owner in the UK. I also run a white label SEO service called SEO Hive, and sort of between those two things, it keeps me busy. I also run a podcast called Retain FM, and we have a Facebook group that goes alongside it. You know, all the usual stuff that people do. And Jan and I were introduced to a mutual friend of ours, Lee Jackson. So let's give Lee a quick shout out right at the top of the call. And yeah, we've been. I'm looking forward to being here. It's been great to be in touch with you about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have quite a range of topics that I would like to cover. We're probably on there for like 45 to 60 minutes in this webinar. Everybody who's watching, please share with us where you are watching from. And also, if you have any questions, shoot them at us straight away. So we are here to essentially answer your questions while having fun and having a nice conversation. But the main goal for this webinar is to deliver as much value as possible. So one question I would like to start with is the one that we got from Graham from the WP Mastery Group, which is probably the biggest point that we need to talk about when it comes to providing SEO services. And that is, how do you lead a client that has no understanding for SEO, no knowledge, to the point that they finally get the value of investing in SEO? And they ultimately, I mean, that's the main goal here, is they sign up for a monthly plan so that you can bring in recurring revenue.
Absolutely. And that, you're right, that is a huge question. And I'm going to start by putting a massive caveat up at the top of this, which is that, of course, every client is a little bit different. And for, you know, those of us that run agencies, we know that we try and process the hell out of everything. Of course, that makes us efficient. Of course it does. And then a client walks through the door and says, but I just do it this way, or I just do it like that. And of course, that sort of makes our processes shake a little. So the first thing, I suppose, just to note is, you know, every client is a little bit different. So particularly if they've got no understanding of SEO and they don't even really know why they need it, you might have different starting points in that conversation when it comes to that. The way I always approach it, though, is to try and frame it in the client's shoes. So before we get on to things like website health and content marketing and all of that kind of stuff, link building, all of that kind of complicated stuff, or even just the doing the do of SEO, we actually start by looking at, so why is this important for their business? What can they achieve through SEO? Why is that a better fit than something like paid advertising or social media marketing or whatever it might be? And that means that sometimes we have to ask some pointy questions, and clients can get a little bit uncomfortable talking about these things, but we need to understand things like, what is their turnover like? What is their profit like? How competitive is their niche? What's their average customer value? How many orders are they getting? More importantly than that, I suppose, is what happens if you say you're getting 100 orders a week? What happens if we get you 200 orders a week? So can your business cope with it? And actually putting SEO in the context of not just it's something that you need to do because it's good for you, but actually this will help grow your business. And over a period of time, it'll help grow your business with massive longevity, and it will be cheaper than the paid for forms of advertising, et cetera, but you're going to have to invest to get there. So that's kind of the first that we start with the conversation, which is very much an educational piece, very much sort of almost consultancy level, and maybe not even mentioning SEO right at the outset, but just
I was just about to say, yeah, that is almost something that you can sell as a discovery session even. It's like, what I think the question you're targeting right here is not, do you need SEO, but what is the website supposed to do for you in the main term? And then how it delivers that results, that's where SEO comes in. But first, I'm totally on point with you that you need to set the foundation in the business before even thinking about SEO.
Absolutely. And you can think about that. So if this is a client that you've just built a website for, if you've got that profit in that project, in that web project, offer them a free consultation session, because that's essentially you building your sales discovery into your previous project. You're still getting paid for it. If this is a brand new client that's just come through the door and says, hey, we want some help here, then you might need to think about how that works. But that's how you have the opportunity to bolt it to the end of a web project as well. And then you can also educate the client through the way that you then approach the sale of the SEO retainer. So in our agency, we don't offer SEO retainers off the shelf. You cannot ring me up and have a conversation with me, and I will sell you a retainer at the end of the call. It doesn't happen like that, and that's really because I need to make sure that we're. The analogy I often use is going straight into a monthly SEO retainer is a bit like getting married on the first date. An SEO retainer means you're going to be working with this client for every month, month in, month out, without fail, for the next 12, 18 months, 2 years, even longer. And that's, going straight into that might be bad news for both of you. Yeah. The other thing to say is that there's also, with the start of any SEO project, there's some housekeeping that needs doing. So what we do in our agency is we use that housekeeping as kind of like smaller sales, so that we can, but they're one-offs, so that we can experience what it's like to work together. They get to work with us, we get to work with them. We make sure we're a good fit. We make sure that everything that they've told us is true or accurate to the best of their ability, and they're not trying to pull a fast one on us. And then we can move into an ongoing agreement. So if you come to us, what we would do first of all is we'd talk to you about an SEO health check, which is a fixed price. It's £400 plus VAT in the UK. And for that, we will run an SEO health check. We'll give you half a day of time to start clearing up some of the stuff that's there, because we don't know how much time we're going to need until we've run the initial check. We can always quote you for a bit more time if we need it. And then we give you a finalized report, which shows you the progress we've made. And it's a product. That's exactly what it is. So we do that, and then on successful completion of that, if we like the client and we think we can add more value, then we go and offer a keyword research exercise. That does vary in price depending on the size of the website, whether it's an e-commerce website or a lead gen website, etc., etc. But you're looking at a higher price point, so it's going to be sort of over £700, possibly up into sort of 1,100-1,200 quid, depending on the.
That's quite affordable. I've worked with an agency here in Germany when I was the lead developer for a German business here, and they start with their keyword analysis, I think, at $3,000, and
wow.
Then their retainers are, I think, the minimum is $2,500 a month, and then you get that certain level of content and stuff like that you would expect. Coming back to that audit process, to the health check, the SEO check, that is, I think, a really smart approach, because you productize that service essentially. Yeah. Ivica had a good question that I think many people will relate to is, can you share your SEO toolbox with us? So what tools do you use to execute that check?
So we have SEMrush very much ingrained in our process. We do use sort of other tools around the edges, but the central hub that drives all of our stuff is SEMrush. For the productized audit reports, it's an SEMrush audit report. It's if we're doing any link building, I know we're going to talk about keyword research in a little bit, because it's another question. We use SEMrush when it comes to that as well. We did look at all of a good number of the tools. Well, it's probably a couple of years ago now, but as I say, it's so ingrained in our process, it'd be quite difficult for us to move. And the reason we chose SEMrush was twofold. The first is that when we looked at something like Ahrefs, Ahrefs had their own scale for stuff. So whereas SEMrush works in percentages that everybody can understand. So, when you run an audit report in Ahrefs and you get a score of, 335,000. It's like, well, is that good or is it bad? Is it a pencil sharpener or is it a Mercedes? It doesn't mean a lot. Whereas with SEMrush, because they work in percentages, you've got a health of 72%. Brilliant. Everybody understands what that means. So that was one of the main reasons. And then the second reason was that it does the way SEMrush has developed over the years. The projects work in modules, so we can switch as many or as few of them off as we need to with each individual client. And it will also include things like social media management, brand monitoring, all of that kind of stuff. So we were trying to empower ourselves to be proactive for our customers rather than reactive. And SEMrush fit our needs the best for that. So, we do use some of the free tools as well, like Google Keywords Planner and those kind of things, but obviously Google Analytics and that stuff.
Yeah.
But the main kind of software we invest in is SEMrush.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, you have everything in one box really with SEMrush. I use for my keyword research only. I use Longtail Pro because I'm not that deep in SEO right now. But Longtail Pro is easy enough so that even the dumb ass that I am can understand SEO. Any other tools that you would consider good investments if SEMrush is a little bit too expensive in a certain situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had quite good success using Mangles. So Mangles have a suite of tools, things like they have a keyword finder, SERP stat checker. There's 5 or 6 tools in their suite, and you can add them to your account. I mean, yeah, we are paying upwards of $1,000 a month for our SEMrush account, so it is an expensive luxury to have. But yeah, Mangles is a far cheaper alternative. The other thing with Mangles is that we found that the reporting that they produce looks quite good as well out the gate. So that really helps if you're trying to do things quickly. Clients maybe adding in some value adds. If you're doing your consultancy as part of a project, you also need it to be as efficient as possible. So we look at that side of things. SE ranking is another good one that provides reliable results. And then there are some free tools as well if you just want to do one-offs. So Site Checker Pro, for example, will let you run an individual page audit report. So it won't do an entire website, but you can put in a specific page if you want to give that level of sort of value or consultancy back to your client. And it's all good.
The top of a funnel, for example, that will make sense to analyze the main landing page of a funnel, because the upsell pages and stuff like that aren't as relevant for SEO in this case. Yeah,
that's it exactly. And there was a number of the tools. So if we just mention Site Checker Pro for a second, there was a number of the tools we looked at where when you put a URL in, like a full URL, so a blog post or a service page or whatever, it would strip the slug off the end and always give you the report for the homepage. Whereas Site Checker Pro was one of the only tools we found which will actually do the URL that you provide it. So, if your client is looking at or wanting to know how they can optimize their blog a bit better, for example, then you can go and put some posts in and actually get post data rather than giving them a sort of generic kind of, oh, well, you should do this with your blog kind of answer. So that was obviously we have the tool within SEMrush to do that. The other thing I should mention is SEMrush has been on a massive sort of curve with its development over the last 2 years. So whereas before we were paying a lot less for SEMrush, but it didn't have as many tools in it, we would use things like Answer the Public for some long tail keyword research and that kind of thing. Over the last couple of years, SEMrush has baked that into their ecosystem as well. So they now have a thing called Questions, which is basically the Answer the Public data. They also have an add-on for Google Docs. So if you're actually writing content for clients, you can put in the keywords and the URLs and that kind of thing, and it will give you an SEO score as you're writing, so that you know that you're delivering something that, from a technical point of view, is going to work.
So that's like the Yoast plugin on steroids, essentially.
Yeah, but it looks a lot better with no advertising. Yeah. Yeah, you got to hate Yoast. For WordPress plugins, I didn't even think of this when you mentioned it. We use SEO Press Pro for rather than Yoast or all-in-one SEO or anything in the back end of WordPress. And that's because we benchmarked a number of them, and SEO Press Pro just seemed to give us the most reliable results in the quickest time frame. And again, it's about, you put it in there and you have your XML sitemap, you have your robots text, you have your htaccess file, you can set templates for your meta descriptions and titles if you're not putting all of them in straight away. So it gave us the flexibility that we needed in order to do that. So yeah, so from a on-page point of view, SEO Press Pro is where we're at anyway.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the tools that you're using. I would like to circle back a little bit on selling SEO retainers in the first place. So I hijacked that conversation with the tools at the point of selling the productized service, the SEO checkup, the one-off product. What do you like to see to upsell a customer on a retainer?
So we need to see that we can show that we can show benefit to them. We don't want to. For those of you that don't sell SEO retainers or are thinking about that, thinking about starting doing it, the conversation to end a retainer is horrible for everybody. Okay, so what we're trying to do is protect you and them from that conversation. And the reality is that, if somebody only sticks around with you for 3 or 4 months because you're not demonstrating value, and that might be because you can't demonstrate the value because of the niche that they're in or the tools that they already have, you're just putting yourself in a bad place. So hence, that's why we do the health check first. We want to see that we can make a difference to this site. So if it's not a site we've built, we need to make sure that we can access the source code, that it's built in a way that's not too bloated, that our tools are going to work with what, with the way that it's currently set up, or do we need to suggest alternatives? When we then move on to the keyword research, what we're really doing from our side of things in that point is assessing the competition. So we get a feel of how quickly can we start to show a benefit to this client. And is this a conversation where, we're going to be saying, look, we can get started. Realistically, it's going to be about 3 months before you start to see an uptake, or is it going to be 6 months, or is it going to be a year, or are you barking up the wrong tree because you're trying to sell training shoes and you're not Nike or Adidas or Puma? You know what I mean? You've got to, essentially what we're trying to do is get that sense of reality back in there and step without the pressure of these results. And only when we've been through those 2 gates and we know that we can deliver value and the client's aware of what their investment's going to be and how long we're estimating this is going to take, only then are we prepared to get into bed, get that wedding ring on and say, right, we're now going to proceed with a retainer. And the great thing is that then when you start the retainer, all of that housekeeping stuff that I was mentioning that you'd normally sort of scrabble to do in the first month because you've only got 4 weeks and the client needs to see results. Well, we've already done it. So we can now get on with actioning this plan. We have the content plan. We have the technical stuff that needs doing that we haven't completed as part of the audit. We know that stuff already. So it puts us in a much more empowered driving seat for that retainer. And we've had 2 projects out of it. So yeah, we can. It's good for all. I see Everitt has also asked another question, and I saw the word fire in inverted commas pop up on the screen. Yes, I have fired clients. In fact, I've done it a couple of times. It feels really weird to do it, and you want to know why. So without going into too many specifics, this is basically why we put this process in place, so that we don't have to do this particularly often. Sometimes it becomes down to a billing issue. Other times it comes down to the fact that clients get through our gates on a sort of technical model, but when we actually start working with them, we find that it's not really a collaboration. It's not really a partnership. They're expecting us to basically give them a business. And then I go back to them and say, look, I don't want your retainer fee. I want shares. So that's...
so the human part fails rather than the technical part.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I suppose the other thing I should maybe mention is throughout all of our discussions about SEO with our clients is we're saying to them, look, we are not experts in whatever your industry is. We had a client I had a client that was in industrial water treatment, and this was the last one I fired, and I fired them in April last year. March, April last year. And the reason that I ultimately came to that point with them was that when they did industrial water treatment for like food hygiene, food preparation plants and that kind of thing. And a lot of their content was about the process of reverse osmosis. Well, you can get reverse osmosis filters for your kitchen, and you're competing with people like Amazon and, you know, John Lewis and places like that. So we tried to explain this to them that, you know, either we need to go a level deeper and actually figure out what it is that we can't just go for reverse osmosis because you're going to go too general. So we either go general or we go deeper. And they didn't kind of grasp that. And what then happened was they just went quiet on us for, well, it would have been the third month. So basically, the first month when somebody doesn't contact us, we try and get in touch with other people in the team. The second month when somebody doesn't contact us, we tell them that we're going to pause billing. And then the third month, if they're still not in touch with us, right, we've already paused billing, so now we're out. This is no longer a collaboration. So that was how that happened. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, we come to do our job because we enjoy what we do, not to do all of the stuff about managing people and you know, it's not the job of my team to run around like a headless chicken and chase your staff. I'm sorry, that's not it. So we cut at that point basically.
That actually brings me on to another question, which can be rather uncomfortable. It's like, when you are working with a retainer client, like how do you structure the communication? How often do you actively reach out? How often do they need to see the results that you're producing and stuff like that?
So we work in quarterly sprints with our clients. The way we do that is every account with us has an account manager, and we ask for one point of contact with the client. So that account manager and the point of contact with the client, they'll be in touch basically every week about something. You know, it might be proofs of content, it might be an SEO report, it might be, we like to send good news snippets as well. So if we notice that they've got to position 1 for something, we'll just drop an email with a screenshot in and just, you know, hey, look, we thought you'd like to know about this. So we, so you have those two people who are in touch regularly. They will have a monthly catch-up call, but once every quarter we will have a targets review. So that's where we actually all get on. I was going to say around the table, but on the same Zoom call as
around the Zoom.
and there will be more people there. So that's normally where I then come into our clients as kind of the director to make sure that we're on target with everything from our side of things. That's where we get the chance to review what is the plan for the next 12 months, 3 years, wherever. How are we moving alongside that? And also every 3 months, that means we have enough data from some of the changes that we've made to see if they're starting to take effect. So we know if we need to do more of something or less of something or change tack on whatever. Yeah. So that's the way that that's kind of the rhythm that we've evolved, and it seems to work really well. We also have, you know, everybody gets a traffic report every month. We do that on the 1st of every month, regardless of when people start, because doing 30 days on 30 days, people don't understand. But if I can say do January on top of December, people get it. So, you know, so we do, that's how we, so that's how we feedback reports and things like that. And then everything's managed through ClickUp. So everybody, the clients in there, our team's in there, comments can happen, chats can happen. We can tag people, we can assign things to the client if they need to approve something. That's how we keep things moving. Very nice. And there's also, speaking to the Virtual Summit Mastery Group here, that's also something, if you hire an agency for doing SEO or an SEO freelancer, look out for these traits that Pete just outlined, because what you want to have is you want to have somebody who's nagging you, because chances are you are busy running your business. That's why you're hiring SEO people to do the SEO for you. So you want them to be proactive rather than having to nag them. And that's
very nicely tying, I think, into the question that Ivica asked about when can you expect to see the first results for the client? Is it like 3 months? Is it 6 months? Does it depend? I heard from Marike from Yoast, the default answer is it depends, and then you take it from there.
And he's right. It does depend, because it comes down to exactly what I was saying earlier. If you're selling training shoes and you're trying to compete with people like Nike, then it's going to take you a lot longer, you know, than if you're, I don't know, if you're selling something that's really unique and you've got a far more niche customer base. So it does depend. Ordinarily, if we make a change on a website, we're ordinarily somewhere around about 3 weeks away from that change definitely being responded to or reflected in the search engines. Now, it could be a lot faster than that, and we can submit sitemaps and we can request crawls and we can do this, that, and the other, but they're only advisory things to Google. And of course, it might be that we change a page that the robot is going to index tomorrow, the Google bot's going to index tomorrow anyway, so we might be quicker than that. But when we're talking about these things with clients, we need them to understand that if we make a change today, that might not actually be reported on for another 3 weeks, which is why monthly overviews don't really work, because, you know, that's only giving us 1 week to make changes in order to see a result. And even then the data is going to be a bit questionable. So yeah, so that's how I explain it to clients. It's maybe a little bit of a simplistic view, but again, if we're talking about clients that don't really understand and know SEO, and then to me as the expert, then I need to explain it to them in a way that they understand.
Yeah. What type of objections do you hear when you explain that it takes like 3 months to see the first reliable data?
Well, they say, can't you do it any faster? And I say, well,
let me just call Larry Page and we'll get this sorted out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another question, it sort of revolves around the same thing, is, you know, when people are launching a new website and they say, so, and then I bet a lot of your audience has this. So you launch a new website and like 5 days later, you get a phone call from your client that says, I used to be in position 1 for this and now I'm on page 3 or whatever. What have you done to my business? And at that point, you just need to, I explain to them that there isn't a phone number or a button that I can press that says, I'm just launching a new website here. Please be kind to it and leave its rankings exactly where it is. No, what's happened is the Google bot has been scanning your website every day for the last 3 years and has seen that it's basically the same. And all of a sudden it's turned up one day and it's completely different. You've moved house. So all it's doing is a proper index of your site. And over the next few days, things will bounce around and you might find that you're on page 3 now, and then you'll be back on page 2, then you're on page 1, then you drop down to page 2 again. Over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to be back to where you were, or better if we've done our job right. But you've got to trust this process and go Google Dance, and you will see what it is we're talking about. So, you know, you're dead right. You can't get in touch with Larry Page and say, by the way, mate, I'm just doing this on this website. It would be really helpful if you could pop me above Amazon for a few days. Would you mind? It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that.
How cool would that be?
Hey, we're onto an idea. Let's start a movement.
Let's call Larry.com. Yeah. Brilliant. I do have some more actionable and technical questions for you, but before we dive into that, I would love to hear your approach on pricing retainers for SEO. Like how do you price? How much work do you include in a retainer? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So we've really struggled with the whole value pricing model versus time pricing model for retainers. And the system that we've come up with is to understand the client's needs, understand their marketing budget in particular, and understand the other pressures that marketing budget has. So, you know, maybe they produce annual catalogs or whatever it might be. That all has to come out that same pot of money. Now, in broad brushstroke terms, most companies should be spending somewhere between 3 and 8 or 9% of their turnover on marketing. Obviously, I realize that's a bit of a range. Some industries are more competitive than others. They'll spend a bit more. Maybe it's an e-commerce website or something. They're going to naturally spend a bit more versus lead gen that might be a bit less, a bit on the lower side of things when it comes to that. If we can understand that and then understand the other marketing priorities, so maybe they are running a small Google Ads campaign at 400 quid a month or whatever it is, it's then not difficult to figure out how much budget they've got left. Versus, because we've done these two gated approaches, versus then the amount of work that we feel we're going to have to do in order to show a result. So the first thing is we figure out within a ballpark what the client can afford, what they should be affording is maybe a better answer to that. But then we have a minimum limit we won't go below, and that minimum limit happens to be a day. So whilst it's a value-based model, there's a time limit on the minimum, if you see what I mean. Because by the time you've put in a client meeting and then a few calls, and then we've had some internal meetings about it, and then you've done some work, a day a month is, we just can't see how we can operate for less than that, basically, for each client. So of course that has a day fee. So that's how low it can go. How much higher it can go? Well, that's up to the client, the agents, the client, the size of the website, how dependent they are on it, what the priority of SEO is in their priority list. And often, if you're working with a new company, going back to that first question, somebody that's never done SEO before, you might be going in at that day rate and saying, look, we want to do a day a month for you for 6 months so that we can show you a return and show you that this stuff actually works. And then what we want to do is have a discussion with you where we can then turbocharge that, which is going to mean that you're going to be spending more money with us from month 7 onwards, but we'll be able to quantify how much that's going to be because we'll have that 6-month experience.
Yeah, and you're also delivering more ROI on that point too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's, we try and avoid things like traffic targets, particularly. We prefer to work on sales driven targets because ultimately traffic is a vanity number. If you want 100,000 visits to your website, I can go and get them for you. But that doesn't mean you're going to sell anymore. So
just pay Facebook for some bot clicks or stuff like that, or set up a paid traffic campaign. You have a 100K and nobody buys.
Yeah, absolutely. So you need to tie it into that business need, and at that point, then you can say, that 4,500 you've given me over the last 6 months, that's now 25,000 in sales. So imagine what it was if you gave me 10,000 a month. Or whatever, we can turn this up, But
doesn't that also bring you in a dependency on the conversion rate of the website in general? Like, what if they hire a designer who changes the main landing page that drives the sales, and then the conversion rate bombs?
Yeah, well, that's
is that a calculated risk that you have to take, or
it is a little bit. We would want to know what was going on. Even if we weren't doing that piece of work, we're collaborating. So if you're doing anything, you're thinking of doing anything that could affect our work, we need to be included in that conversation. Even if it's just for an advisory, can you take 10 minutes and look at this? We would also make sure that whilst we're not necessarily selling conversion rate optimization, we would make sure that we have tracking in place. Because look, at the end of the day, I don't care whether your inquiry button's at the top or the bottom. I don't care whether it's red or blue or green or gray or white or yellow. It makes no difference to me. What I need to know is that whatever it is making the most sales for you, or getting the most inquiries for you. So let's put some data on it. Let's split test it. Let's use a tool. If it's a WordPress site, let's use a tool like Split Hero and deliver a red button, a green button, a yellow button, and see which one converts the best and which one it is. There you go. That's how we approach it. I'm being very simplistic, saying just colors of buttons, page layouts.
Do you also track the statistics like conversion rate, bounce rate, and stuff like that, and keep a record of them so that then if something goes south, you have the data in order to prove that, look, when we started working, we were at this level, then we grew consistently to X, and now you changed something, and that's why it's bombing down right now.
Yeah, we do. So that's part of the account manager's job, to run that inventory, because whilst we can get into the website and we can see forms that are submitted or sales that are made or whatever, particularly if it's a lead gen website, we don't necessarily know how many people have rung the phone and just dial the number in off the top of the website and that kind of thing. So we take our data, but we always try and validate that with the client at those monthly check-ins that the account manager has, and they all get recorded in a Google Sheet so that we have that data over a period of time. And as you say, we can then go back and say, well, look, in September it was working, you employed this designer in October, and hey, look, then it went south. You're not going to be Einstein to put 2 and 2 together. That's how we'd approach that.
Brilliant. So, sounds like a very sophisticated approach. I would love to change gears a little bit and talk about implementing SEO.
Go for it.
And one of the biggest questions I personally have right now is about optimizing blog articles, because as you well know, I'm doing a lot of summits and interviews and stuff like that. And what I would love to know is, when you have like 60-minute of video conversation, just the one that we are doing right now could be a good example. Like, let's say I want to repurpose that into a blog article, and I might just embed this and publish the transcription. Is that the smartest way to use video content for SEO, or do you have other approaches for that?
So in terms of video for SEO, yes, it is a good idea to have as full a transcription as you can get there. Look, I mean, Jan, you know what it's like when you get a transcription of something, particularly if there's multiple people on a call. The transcriptions can be a little bit haphazard at the best of times. So
it's true.
But by transcription, if it's the nearest best thing you can get, then it's a good thing to do. However, if you take a webinar like this, for example, this would make a terrible single blog post, because we're 37 minutes in, and we've already covered about 7 topics. So whilst you could go and put one mega piece together about the awesomeness of Pete Everitt, and that would be a brilliant thing for you to do, it's just not going to mean a lot to anything, because there's so much going on. So it would be far better to then look at how those things break down and take them as their component parts, and then look at those things and say, okay, so where do each of these component parts fit within the process? So a lot of you guys have heard marketing gurus talking about funnels and top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel kind of stuff. So it might be that 2 parts of this call work really well as top of funnel stuff: how to price SEO and how to sell SEO. I can tell you straight off the bat, there's your first 2. So all of a sudden, you're not now doing a full thing. You're taking a snippet of this call or this webinar, and you're transcribing those parts, and you're putting those maybe with a nice header and a footer. And what you then might do is put a lead magnet on the end, which is a Google sheet about how to calculate a client's marketing spend. So we do and then you've got an email capture on it. So all of a sudden, I'm now not just doing that SEO piece, because I'm also now trying to put it into your funnel. And you can then take that. Plus, it's great because that means that now off one webinar, you've now got 6 bits of content. Fantastic. But you're also trying to do something with it. One of the main things you should ask when you do any of these things, I mean, I approach this call thinking, right, if somebody's going to listen to me rabbit on for 60 minutes, let's say, what are they going to get out of it? What's the point? Why should they invest their time? And you need to scale that down. If somebody's going to watch a video for 4 minutes or read a blog for 4 minutes, why should they invest that time? What are they going to get out of it? And then, as long as they're getting something of value, they're getting something practical, actionable, I don't know, an opinion piece, it depends what it is you're writing, you're then positioned to put in that call to action to take them to the next step. And that call to action might filter them out of your funnel because they're not applicable, or it might let them move on to the next step. And all of a sudden, SEO is meeting digital marketing, and they're kind of coming together a bit like this, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
My camera went funny when I did that. So
shifty focus.
So
that's a great analogy, shifting focus. It's like instead of trying to cramp everything into one post, you just splice things up. And that's actually what I've done without knowing that I'm doing, is by creating worksheets and summaries from every interview that I've done from my last summit. Now I'm just repurposing each step mentioned in those summaries into a blog post on the website.
Yeah, and that's great. And so I'm aware of the time, and I know you sent me a whole load more questions, and we're getting ones in the chat.
No,
so I'll start merging some answers together here. So
I'll bring you back on if we need to. So
that's fine. Yeah, I'm more than happy to come back. So one of the questions we had was about internal link building.
Yeah. And
when you generate content, what normally happens when somebody writes a blog, and I'm 99% sure, Jan, you're going to nod your head in about 30 seconds time. When somebody writes a blog post, what they normally do is they write it, they make sure the keyword's right, it's got a nice image, it's maybe got the video and the transcript in an accordion, whatever. And then they run it through Yoast or SEO Press and whatever, and they then skim it one last time and say, oh yeah, I wrote a post about whatever it was, so I best put an internal link into that. And they go and always link backwards. So a new post, you link to posts or content that you created in the past. What people hardly ever do is go back through posts that they wrote in the past and then link to posts that appeared in the future. Does that make sense? So if you're now writing your post about pricing for how to price an SEO retainer based off a set chunk of this video, do you ever go back to stuff that you created in the second half of last year and put links back to this? And I bet you don't. And that is well, because it's a pain in the ass to do.
Yeah, it's not fun. Yeah,
it's not fun. But the reality is that so many of the steps of good SEO are the unsexy stuff. We all want to be generating the content and you know, seeing the funnels work and reporting the big wins and this, that, and the other. But you know, we've had a question about Google My Business. That is one of the most unsexy platforms to use on the planet. But the reality is, if you're trying to run, there you go. If you're trying to run local SEO for a you know, a local client, you're not going to escape it. You've got to get on with doing that thing. Link building is not a sexy process. It is. There's a hell of a.
Robbie McHugh is that from Digital Summit Mastery.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, so that's link forward. Pay it forward. Why didn't I think of that when I was talking about it? But yeah, so many different parts of SEO are these unsexy processes, but they just need to be done. And actually it's those layers which then allow you to build that foundation that then lets you do the sexy stuff on top, and ta-da, you now get to give the big results to clients. And so many people want to race to the top that they forget about the journey and the foundation that's there in the background.
Yeah. Speaking about foundation, Robbie had another really good question. Is Google Analytics still the best platform for tracking traffic? Now, I would like to recommend also Microsoft Clarity for that, because it is free heat map tracking and click tracking and stuff. But that's just my 2 cents. Curious to know what you think.
We still use Google Analytics like 99% of the time, just because people people are used to it. People understand it. It comes down to thanks. It comes down to what clients are willing to understand. Also, what ties in with our other tools. You know, Google Analytics integrates perfectly with SEMrush into all our reporting. So yeah, we still rely heavily on that.
How do you find that GDPR trackers and stuff like that impact the performance?
Normally, we've not seen massive drops. GDPR was like, I was going to say was a thing. It still is a thing. You know, it was far clearer or more of a problem in people's minds like a year ago. It's so 2019. And
okay, we have COVID now, so
yeah,
let's ignore GDPR.
I know. We have Brexit, so yeah, we've got the double whammy over here. But yeah, we find that the majority of users, and I'm talking like well over 90%, simply click agree. They just click agree. The use of full screen pop-ups for GDPR consent, rather than just being a little banner that appears at the bottom, it's now so in your face. If you view stuff on a mobile, of course, you end up with you can't even see the website unless you click agree to get rid of this flipping thing. So yeah, they're not really impacting our tracking too much. Actually, they're okay.
That's very good to hear. That's something I was worrying about a lot, especially when it comes to like running virtual events. You want to make sure that the tracking is on point, that you also can retarget people as needed when they signed in, and even abandon cards and stuff like that. But back to SEO, is publishing the content regularly, like say you're writing 500 to 700 word posts every week, that's easy for you? Or you could write one 3,000 word blog post a month. What's the better, if there is such a thing?
Right. So I'm going to give you that SEO answer of it depends. I'll just grab some water. But
yeah, we should make like a drinking game. Every time you get it depends, you have to clear your beer or something like that.
Yeah, that's not water. It is actually. Right. So there's two ways of looking at this. There's the technical side of things, and there's the kind of actual more practical side of how this works. So the technical side of things is Google ultimately wants your website to be updated as much as it possibly can, and therefore publishing as multiple times throughout a month or a period of time is the best way of doing it, regardless of how much or little content that you're creating. And that regularity thing, in order to keep your timestamps fresh with Google, is super, super key. The length of your content, however, is more based on the competition level of the content that you're creating. So yeah, so you need to put the balance in that's the balance that you're trying to address. Now, if you look at people like Brian Dean or Neil Patel, they don't create that much content. Brian Dean sort of is quite vocal in the fact he doesn't create too much content. Neil Patel doesn't actually create that much content in terms of number of articles. He just shouts about them quite a lot, so it looks like he's done a lot, and he's been doing it for years, so he has quite a lot of content now.
Yeah, and he has the team to back him. Yep. Yeah,
absolutely. What they do is they write like one Herculean post every 2-3 weeks, month maybe, and that is their regular. That is what they class as regular. But they are in very competitive niches. You know, Brian Dean, who's one of the kings of SEO, wouldn't be the king of SEO if he's on page 2. So it's, he's got a reputation to live up to with that, and therefore he needs to play the game that gets him that accolade, essentially. If we scale that back to either you as an agency or you serving your local clients, or clients that you work with, the reality is you're probably not dealing with Brian Deans or Neil Patels in their industry most of the time. Occasionally you will, and that's brilliant, and you can really go to town on what you do with them, and SEO almost becomes a sort of secondary consideration for those clients. But for the vast majority of your bread and butter clients, that's not where you are. So you do need to then be thinking about, right, can you do a post a week? Is that too much? Can you be doing 2 posts a week? We've had an inquiry come into SEO Hive overnight that says, so we're helping them out with some delivery of SEO, but they have their own in-house SEO consultant, and we're supporting them. And they've sent us a query saying, we've just done some maths that says we need to produce 12 pieces of content a month, and there's no way we can do that. Can you help us do it? And we're going to go back to them and figure out how we can help them do that. Now, they're looking at far shorter pieces, but a lot more volume. And that's because of the clients that they're trying to attract. So it really does depend. on those things. And when you start to unpack who the client is, their niche, their authority within that niche, their, the weight that they're throwing around, the backlinks that they already have versus the backlinks that you can gain from them and all that kind of stuff, then that's where you then start to hit this balance of regularity versus length. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I should also say that the shorter the piece is, the harder it is to get backlinks to it. So if you're trying to run a backlink strategy for somebody, having the longer form content makes that life.
Yeah, I can imagine. And from how I would digest your answer, it's really how much content can you deliver without sacrificing the quality of the content, because you still want to make it valuable and helpful, but also being aware of doing too much in some situations when you don't have that much competition. Maybe it might make sense to not produce so much content, but to focus on other aspects of SEO.
Absolutely. And look at your tracking, whichever platform you're using for it. Look at your tracking and see where people are bouncing off, or see where they're exiting the website. What is getting them to a particular point and then they are leaving, particularly if that's a bit further down the funnel. So you're looking at more middle of funnel stuff in the consideration phase. Why aren't they going on to the next page or filling out that call to action or whatever it might be? Because whilst some people would class that as more conversion rate stuff, actually, if I can increase the inquiry rate on a page by 5% by changing a few buttons around, then actually that's ultimately helping me demonstrate my ROI to my customer. And that's where SEO becomes more than just where you appear in the search engines.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. We have like 9 minutes left roughly. I want to be respectful of your time. So with the new year around the corner, we just finished the first month of 2021. What changes in SEO did you see over the past, or are announced that are coming up in 2021 that we should be aware of?
So one of the key things that we've seen is about a year ago, I'm going to say about a year ago, maybe it was slightly longer, Google introduced within its page speed insights the aspects of first contentful paint, first input delay, largest contentful paint, and cumulative layout shifts. Those 4 metrics basically. And they weren't sneaky about how they put them in, but they put them in and then nothing really changed. Other than it made your page speed insight reports look rubbish, because all of a sudden the scores were terrible. What we've found though is, particularly over the second half of 2020, is that those metrics are now being used more heavily in other ways to affect rankings and some of the other Google services that are available. So, for example, we run SEO for a fashion magazine. You wouldn't expect it looking at me. I'm hardly a fashion guru. But yeah, we run SEO for a fashion retailers magazine here in the UK. And where they need to be is in the Google News feed. Google News wouldn't let us in until we'd sorted those 4 things. So that's what I mean by they're all of a sudden starting to crop up in places where you didn't used to see them, and people are scratching their heads saying, why isn't it working? We used to be in Google News and now we're not. And hey presto, these 4 things that have been sitting in the background are now starting to have real world effects. So as to where to pay attention, or what changes should you be aware of, I don't think I've ever spoken to another agency owner that's looked at those 4 metrics in the light of their web design or development projects. I've not spoken to many SEOs that advise on them either. People are aware of them, but they don't really advise on them. And I think that's going to be one of those 4 things are now going to crop up in more and more places, and ultimately will end up having an effect on the actual organic SERPs. That's my sort of 2 penneth anyway.
Yeah, that's what I got from my conversation with Adam Silverstein too. I had Adam, he's a developer relations at Google, And he spoke on the WP Agency Summit about those metrics that you mentioned, which, by the way, small pitch right here, it is available for free. So you can sign up at wpagencysummit.com, get the free replay and see what Adam talked about in these metrics. And he also made it very clear that Google focuses so much on the user experience on the websites it recommends, that those things, it just makes perfect sense, as you said, that they would exclude websites who don't meet their minimum criteria.
Yeah, and that's ultimately where we're going to be going. And for some websites, that's going to be a few tweaks and happy days. And for other websites, it's going to be complete rebuilds. As agencies, we need to make sure that we're delivering websites that at least have the ability to play within Google's rules. And so much of those rules are things to do with render blocking JavaScript and minification of files, stuff like that. It's all technical stuff. It's stuff that the client isn't going to know about. And the story I'm dreading to hear is when an agency is then sued because they've not delivered a website that technically plays to the rules of Google. And that's really what the clients are expecting from you when they place a web project.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. And I think ultimately it changes the web for the better because it makes websites more easy to use and faster loading.
Yeah.
I also think that they are a good way of demonstrating your understanding about the tech behind the website from an agency perspective, because you cannot expect that the average client you're talking to understand what LCP is or what cumulative layout shift is. They see a website and then they see Arial font and suddenly it's Lato or Montserrat or whatever. And they don't bother too much about that usually. But then if you can maybe even increase the project budget with that reasoning, because it takes more time to build a sophisticated website that caters to all those criteria rather than just slapping a theme onto a WordPress site, that can be quite a positive thing, I guess. And before I let you go, I want to dive into my favorite topic on SEO, and probably it's my favorite because it's the only one that I'm spending time on, really. And
you left your favorite to 56 minutes into the hour. Thanks, Jan.
Yeah, because it's not about me, it's about you. So the topic that I'm playing most with in SEO is keyword research. I would love to hear your very brief take on it. And I intentionally left it to like 3 minutes right now because I can go rambling on this and I don't want to.
So one of, right. First thing with keyword research is, this might seem completely obvious to people. Some people don't get it. Clients often don't get it. www stands for World Wide Web. The whole thing's connected. We use backlinks for websites. Keywords work in exactly the same way. They are all connected in various ways. And really what you're trying to do for your clients is to create keyword groups. That will be around, we used to call them primary, secondary, and tertiary keywords. Now most people call them pillars, clusters, and nodes, or pillars and clusters and something else, I don't know. But they're basically the same thing. So what you're trying to do is identify the primary keywords, which are like the holy grails for your clients. If we're going back to that training shoe website that we've talked about all the way through this live call, it is training shoes. It's going to take you a while to rank for it. The competition level is going to be through the roof, but that is ultimately where you want to be. Underneath that, so that's the pillar. Underneath that, you then have the clusters. So you have squash shoes, training shoes, leather shoes, rubber shoes, studded shoes, whatever it might be. I'm making this up. You get the idea. So then you have clusters, and so they become the pillars of the cluster. And then around those, you then have the multiple layers of keywords, which then start to verge into long tail keywords to do with, what's the best type of sports shoe for playing squash, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So that's where you're trying to get to. How you get there depends on the tools that you've got available to you. Hey presto, I rely quite heavily on SEMrush because it's something we invest in, and we have those tools available. And SEMrush has great parts to it, things like the keyword manager, the keyword magic tool, which gives you a whole load of relations based on the Google database, so you can see what Google thinks is related, even if it's not necessarily related, if you see what I mean. It now has this thing called Questions, which is basically its replacement for Answer the Public and services like that, or the long tail keyword pro that you use. So we basically build things out into those levels. If you don't want to pay for expensive tools like SEMrush, you can go and get all this data for free on the Google Ads keyword planner. It's a horrible interface, and you've got to click at like 1 million levels, but the data is there. You can get to it. And go and set up yourself a Google Ads account. I think you've got to put a credit card in to validate your account, but you don't have to spend any money. And then you can access that tool, and it will give you relations. That the Google Ads tool also will let you put in URLs. If you know the competitors of websites of your clients, you can put their URLs in it. It'll spit back the suggestions based from that. So that is a 2.5 minute roundup of how we do keyword research.
Fantastic. That's also hopefully giving people, I mean, the WP Mastery Group really is the main audience for this webinar, but in the Virtual Summit Mastery Group, I also want to make sure that people get value here. So when you're doing keyword research and you want to establish the Virtual Summit kind of as a brand, as a true established event in your market, and not just something you launch every quarter, and you want to bring value in SEO, then put in competing events, see what they rank for, and then try to outrank them, sneak some traffic from them, and just get an idea of what you want to be writing about. And it seems that we're doing a good job here. Thank you so much, Robbie.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Robbie. Yeah, and just to say, if you're going that far on your competitors, look at where they're getting their links from too, because you might find some gems in there.
Yeah, in SEMrush, I suppose.
Yeah,
Ahrefs and stuff.
Yeah, Ahrefs, or even Mangles will. I think Mangles is about $40 a month from memory. Maybe might be $50.
That's super affordable. Yeah.
But yeah, that will, you can put a URL in there and it'll tell you what the referring domains are. So you can go and very quickly export the list and see if there's some opportunities for you to go to similar places to get link backs.
I already see I have to bring you back on for a continuing of this conversation. Pete, thank you so much for coming on. Where do people get in touch with you? I have prepared a banner for your podcast for your main website. But besides that, where do people get in touch with you to learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so all my podcast stuff is at peteeveritt.com. If you want to get hold of me, then that's the best place, or on Facebook is normally where I kind of reside. If you want to check out SEO Hive, that is seohive.co. That is our white label service for agencies. Yeah, somewhere between the three. Hey, look, however you get hold of me, just mention WP Mastery and Jan, and I'll make sure I'm not too nasty to you.
I love it. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I hope you had a blast. And if you have any questions in watching the replay, just tag me, tag Pete, and we'll make sure that we get your questions answered. Thank you so much. Have a great day.